Hello and welcome to the video. In this lesson, we will learn 502 complex and exquisite words to use instead of very in English. Let us start the lesson. Very rich, wealthy. Very rich, wealthy. Very quiet, silent. Very quiet, silent. Very nice, kind. Very nice, kind. Very cold, freezing. Very cold, freezing. Very smart, intelligent. Very smart, intelligent. Very short, brief. Very short, brief. Very simple, basic. Very simple, basic. Very large, huge. Very large, huge. Very good, excellent. Very good, excellent. Very deserted, desolate. Very deserted, desolate. Very creative, innovative. Very creative, innovative. Very crowded, bustling. Very crowded, bustling. Very cute, adorable. Very cute, adorable. Very dangerous, threatening. Very dangerous, threatening. Very dear, cherished. Very dear, cherished. Very realistic, practical. Very realistic, practical. Very risky, perilous. Very risky, perilous. Very understandable, comprehensible. Very understandable, comprehensible. Very confused, perplexed. Very confused, perplexed. Very depressed, despondent. Very depressed, despondent. Very detailed, meticulous. Very detailed, meticulous. Very big, massive. Very big, massive. Very dull, boring. Very dull, boring. Very deep, profound. Very deep, profound. Very beautiful, gorgeous. Very beautiful, gorgeous. Very bright, luminous. Very bright, luminous. Very accurate, exact. Very accurate, exact. Very afraid, terrified. Very afraid, terrified. Very angry, furious. very angry, furious, very bad, evil, very bad, evil, very busy, occupied, very busy, occupied, very calm, serene, very calm, serene, very careful, cautious, very careful, cautious, very charmed, mesmerized, very charmed, mesmerized, very clean, spotless, very clean, spotless, very clever, brilliant, very clever, brilliant, very colorful, vibrant, very colorful, vibrant, very hard, tedious, very hard, tedious, very eager, keen, very eager, keen, very evil, wicked, very evil, wicked, very willing, eager, very willing, eager, very fancy, luxurious, very fancy, luxurious, very far, distant, very far, distant, very fast, quick, very fast, quick, very fond of, attached, very fond of, attached, very lucky, fortunate, very lucky, fortunate, very friendly, affectionate, very friendly, affectionate, very funny, hilarious, very funny, hilarious, very different, disparate, very different, disparate, very difficult, challenging, very difficult, challenging, very dry, parched, very dry, parched, very glad, overjoyed, very glad, overjoyed, very greedy, covetous, very greedy, covetous, very happy, ecstatic, very happy, ecstatic, very hard, difficult, very hard, difficult, very scarce, rare, very scarce, rare, very large, colossal, very large, colossal, very high, soaring, very high, soaring, very exciting, exhilarating, very exciting, exhilarating, very costly, expensive, very costly, expensive, very humble, courteous, very humble, courteous, very interesting, fascinating, very interesting, fascinating, very jolly, carefree, very jolly, carefree, very kind, considerate, very kind, considerate, very lazy, indolent, very lazy, indolent, very limited, finite, very limited, finite, very little, tiny, very little, tiny, very lively, animated, very lively, animated, very long, extensive, very long, extensive, very long term, enduring, very long term, enduring, very everlasting, eternal, very everlasting, eternal, very hungry, starving, very hungry, starving, very hot, battered, very hot, battered, very important, crucial, very important, crucial, very inexpensive, cheap, very inexpensive, cheap, very loose, slack, very loose, slack, very loud, deafening, very loud, deafening, very smelly, pungent, very smelly, pungent, very tight, taunt, very tight, taunt, very smooth, sleek, very smooth, sleek, very soft, delicate, very soft, delicate, very scary, petrifying, very scary, petrifying, very loved, adored, very loved, adored, very lovely, stunning, very lovely, stunning, very mean, cruel, very mean, cruel, very messy, chaotic, very messy, chaotic, very much, exceeding, very much, exceeding, very necessary, essential, very necessary, essential, very nervous, apprehensive, very nervous, apprehensive, very noisy, deafening, very noisy, deafening, very painful, excruciating, very painful, excruciating, very pale, ashen, very pale, ashen, very perfect, flawless, very perfect, flawless, very pleasant, amiable, very pleasant, amiable, very poor, destitute, very poor, destitute, very pretty, beautiful, very pretty, beautiful, very strong, powerful, very strong, powerful, very protective, defensive, very protective, defensive, very proud, noble, very proud, noble, very many, numerous, very many, numerous, very different, diverse, very different, diverse, very often, frequently, very often, frequently, very old, ancient, very old, ancient, very open, transparent, very open, transparent, very quick, rapid, very quick, rapid, very rainy, pouring, very rainy, pouring, very roomy, spacious, very roomy, spacious, very sad, sorrowful, very sad, sorrowful, very shy, timid, very shy, timid, very skinny, skeletal, very skinny, skeletal, very sleepy, drowsy, very sleepy, drowsy, very slow, sluggish, very slow, sluggish, very serious, grave, very serious, grave, very shiny, glowing, very shiny, glowing, very strong, unyielding, very strong, unyielding, very stupid, idiotic, very stupid, idiotic, very sure, certain, very sure, certain, very talented, gifted, very talented, gifted, very tall, giant, very tall, giant, very tasty, delicious, very tasty, delicious, very thin, gaunt, very thin, gaunt, very valuable, precious, very valuable, precious, very hot, scalding, very hot, scalding, very weak, frail, very weak, frail, very wet, soaking, very wet, soaking, very tight, constricting, very tight, constricting, very tired, exhausted, very tired, exhausted, very ugly, hideous, very ugly, hideous, very sorry, apologetic, very sorry, apologetic, very special, exceptional, very special, exceptional, very unhappy, miserable, very unhappy, miserable, very upset, distraught, very upset, distraught, very wicked, villainous, very wicked, villainous, very worried, distressed, very worried, distressed, very wise, sage, very wise, sage, very excited, thrilled, very excited, thrilled, very tiny, minuscule, very tiny, minuscule, very kind, thoughtful, very kind, thoughtful, very small, petite, very small, petite, very scary, chilling, very scary, chilling, very quiet, hushed, very quiet, hushed, very great, terrific, very great, terrific, very fat, obese, very fat, obese, very difficult, arduous, very difficult, arduous, very dirty, filthy, very dirty, filthy, very dry, arid, very dry, arid, very easy, effortless, very easy, effortless, very calm, serene, very calm, serene, very fierce, ferocious, very fierce, ferocious, very clear, obvious, very clear, obvious, very angry, furious, very angry, furious, very bad, awful, very bad, awful, very busy, swamped, very busy, swamped, very valuable, precious, very valuable, precious, very wise, sagacious, very wise, sagacious, very unhappy, miserable, very unhappy, miserable, very bright, blinding, very bright, blinding, very complete, comprehensive, very complete, comprehensive, very basic, elementary, very basic, elementary, very lively, vivacious, very lively, vivacious, very nearly, almost, very nearly, almost, very annoying, irritating, very annoying, irritating, very important, relevant, very important, relevant, very passionate, ardent, very passionate, ardent, very fragrant, aromatic, very fragrant, aromatic, very attractive, appealing, very attractive, appealing, very terrible, awful, very terrible, awful, very believable, plausible, very believable, plausible, very favorable, beneficial, very favorable, beneficial, very weird, bizarre, very weird, bizarre, very innocent, blameless, very innocent, blameless, very brave, courageous, very brave, courageous, very relaxed, comfortable, very relaxed, comfortable, very restricted, confined, very restricted, confined, very thoughtful, considerate, very thoughtful, considerate, very modern, contemporary, very modern, contemporary, very opposite, contrary, very opposite, contrary, very right, correct, very right, correct, very misleading, deceptive, very misleading, deceptive, very dedicated, committed, very dedicated, committed, very delicate, fragile, very delicate, fragile, very decreased, diminished, very decreased, diminished, very disastrous, catastrophic, very disastrous, catastrophic, very showy, revealing, very showy, revealing, very shameful, disgracing, very shameful, disgracing, very selfish, egocentric, very selfish, egocentric, very essential, fundamental, very essential, fundamental, very exact, precise, very exact, precise, very extra, additional, very extra, additional, very famous, renowned, very famous, renowned, very foolish, silly, very foolish, silly, very sly, cunning, very sly, cunning, very sparkly, glittering, very sparkling, glittering, very good looking, handsome, very good looking, handsome, very hard, tough, very hard, tough, very dangerous, hazardous, very dangerous, hazardous, very tired, bushed, very tired, bushed, very tolerant, liberal, very tolerant, liberal, very vital, imperative, very vital, imperative, very rude, impolite, very rude, impolite, very infamous, notorious, very infamous, notorious, very childish, puerile, very childish, puerile, very inflexible, rigid, very inflexible, rigid, very casual, informal, very casual, informal, very lonely, isolated, very lonely, isolated, very jealous, envious, very jealous, envious, very joyful, delighted, very joyful, delighted, very deadly, lethal, very deadly, lethal, very mad, insane, very mad, insane, very cruel, merciless, very cruel, merciless, very gentle, mild, very gentle, mild, very reduced, minimized, very reduced, minimized, very naked, bare, very naked, bare, very local, native, very local, native, very stubborn, obdurate, very stubborn, obdurate, very biological, organic, very biological, organic, very specific, particular, very specific, particular, very toxic, poisonous, very toxic, poisonous, very urgent, pressing, very urgent, pressing, very immediate, prompt, very immediate, prompt, very wealthy, affluent, very wealthy, affluent, very fair, reasonable, very fair, reasonable, very religious, devout, very religious, devout, very regretful, remorseful, very regretful, remorseful, very isolated, remote, very isolated, remote, very bad, disgusting, very bad, disgusting, very delicious, sumptuous, very delicious, sumptuous, very meaningful, significant, very meaningful, significant, very honest, sincere, very honest, sincere, very moody, temperamental, very moody, temperamental, very touchy, sensitive, very touchy, sensitive, very trustworthy, reliable, very trustworthy, reliable, very unusual, strange, very unusual, strange, very useless, vain, very useless, vain, very decent, virtuous, very decent, virtuous, very popular, renowned, very popular, renowned, very clean, immaculate, very clean, immaculate, very funny, humorous, very funny, humorous, very great, grand, very great, grand, very amazing, astonishing, very amazing, astonishing, very troubling, distressing, very troubling, distressing, very bright, incandescent, very bright, incandescent, very hurt, wounded, very hurt, wounded, very dull, boring, very dull, boring, very dark, gloomy, very dark, gloomy, very little, miniature, very little, miniature, very numerous, abundant, very numerous, abundant, very active, energetic, very active, energetic, very true, authentic, very true, authentic, very infertile, barren, very infertile, barren, very huge, enormous, very huge, enormous, very funny, comical, very funny, comical, very concentrated, condensed, very concentrated, condensed, very cool, chilling, very cool, chilling, very damaged, impaired, very damaged, impaired, very faulty, defective, very faulty, defective, very extreme, extravagant, very extreme, extravagant, very strange, eccentric, very strange, eccentric, very honest, candid, very honest, candid, very thankful, grateful, very thankful, grateful, very charming, chivalrous, very charming, chivalrous, very brilliant, genius, very brilliant, genius, very hostile, antagonistic, very hostile, antagonistic, very wet, humid, very wet, humid, very hateful, loathing, very hateful, loathing, very dirty, filthy, very dirty, filthy, very unusual, extraordinary, very unusual, extraordinary, very expensive, pricey, very expensive, pricey, very warm, hot, very warm, hot, very long, extensive, very long, extensive, very cool, cold, very cool, cold, very keen, ardent, very keen, ardent, very impressive, remarkable, very impressive, remarkable, very educational, enlightening, very educational, enlightening, very drunk, intoxicated, very drunk, intoxicated, very accurate, precise, very accurate, precise, very ashamed, humiliated, very ashamed, humiliated, very solid, firm, very solid, firm, very forceful, aggressive, very forceful, aggressive, very emotional, sensitive, very emotional, sensitive, very frothy, effervescent, very frothy, effervescent, very amazed, shocked, very amazed, shocked, very eager, zealous, very eager, zealous, very fluffy, feathery, very fluffy, feathery, very angry, furious, very angry, furious, very exciting, breathtaking, very exciting, breathtaking, very anxious, restless, very anxious, restless, very costly, overpriced, very costly, overpriced, very aware, conscious, very aware, conscious, very fair, equitable, very fair, equitable, very friendly, gregarious, very friendly, gregarious, very loyal, devoted, very loyal, devoted, very frustrating, exasperating, very frustrating, exasperating, very basic, rudimentary, very basic, rudimentary, very common, typical, very common, typical, very full, packed, very full, packed, very beautiful, gorgeous, very beautiful, gorgeous, very clear, brilliant, very clear, brilliant, very cold, freezing, very cold, freezing, very fast, supersonic, very fast, supersonic, very logical, rational, very logical, rational, very driven, ambitious, very driven, ambitious, very prosperous, prolific, very prosperous, prolific, very concerned, worried, very concerned, worried, very few, meager, very few, meager, very secure, confident, very secure, confident, very confused, baffled, very confused, baffled, very corrupt, fraudulent, very corrupt, fraudulent, very lucky, fortunate, very lucky, fortunate, very conscious, premeditated, very conscious, premeditated, very creamy, buttery, very creamy, buttery, very constant, consistent, very constant, consistent, very creepy, unnerving, very creepy, unnerving, very much, plenty, very much, plenty, very bright, intelligent, very bright, intelligent, very vital, crucial, very vital, crucial, very bony, skeletal, very bony, skeletal, very intense, severe, very intense, severe, very crunchy, crispy, very crunchy, crispy, very boring,